You're listening to the Future Tech Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Future technologies such as artificial intelligence, stem cells, 3D printing, gene editing, Bitcoin, blockchain, the microbiome, quantum computing, virtual reality, and exploring space are much closer than you might think. In fact, many early versions of these technologies are in play right now, and the companies that are using these technologies are the focus of this podcast. My goal for you, the listener, is to learn from these podcasts. You may very well learn something that may change the course of your life for the better, steer you towards a new career, or give you insight into addressing a thorny medical problem. Remember, this podcast and its content is informational in nature only. No medical, tax, legal, financial, or psychological advice is being given. If you've enjoyed the podcast, please listen, subscribe, like, and tell your friends about it. Thank you. Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Future Tech and Future Tech Health Podcast. I have Paula Baker-Laporte. She works at Healthy Home Design. She does consulting. She graduated from the University of Toronto School of Architecture and the International Institute of Bau-Biologie and Ecology in 1995. And she's dedicated her architectural practice to the registered architect and a fellow to the precepts of environmentally sound health and enhancing architecture, which sounds good to me. I get a feeling from going into buildings, either a good or a bad one. And I guess I thought for a while it was surprising how much a building environment affects me mentally and emotionally. It does. Maybe I'm a sensitive person. I don't know, but I have a feeling that her work is super important. So, Paula, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So within the world of architecture, why this focus and what drew you to it?
Well, I came upon this focus when I became ill 30 years ago. Didn't know what was wrong with me, went from doctor to doctor to doctor, and finally discovered that I was sensitive to chemicals that we were all the time. It was an eye-opener, because no one had ever mentioned anything about health the whole time I had studied architecture.
Was this chemicals in your home or at work or where?
Everywhere. I was one of a growing number of people who became pretty sensitized and so reacted to chemicals at a very small amount in any environment that was thought to be a safe amount.
When you say you reacted, what would happen? Would you sneeze or cough or feel sick, or what were the symptoms for you?
Well, it's different for everybody. There are many different paths it could take. For me, because I was living in an environment that was not a healthy environment, unbeknownst to me, I was getting pneumonia every year. And then when I was exposed to raw chemicals, I would lose focus or feel dizzy or a number of symptoms. I was just feeling unwell. I was tired. And until I learned once I understood that chemicals could affect me this way, I could see the one-on-one relationship. For example, I would go to a shopping mall and get a headache because I was in there and often couldn't remember what I'd come to get. And it turns out that the formaldehyde levels in shopping malls, at least back then, were fairly high because they used formaldehyde in all the clothing to size it so it fit neatly on the in the stores. So once I understood where chemicals were in an environment, it just became, oh yes, this is causing that. But until then, it was a big mystery, and it was a mystery to any of the doctors I went to because they'd never heard of such a thing.
So one place I guess you could control was at least your home environment and probably your car. Was that your thinking, and was that prompted you to action?
Yes, at first I thought, well, I can't be an architect anymore because I'm exposed to chemicals all the time. And then I said, wait a minute, if they're bad for me, aren't they bad for other people who aren't as symptomatic? How can we do this healthier? So that became a wonderful new start to a career. This is 30 years ago, and this has been our focus for all of that time.
Okay. Did you start with your own home, or how did you start to implement and gather so how did you figure out, okay, how do I change the architecture of a building, or how do I alter the environment such that it will be healthier? How did you start that process?
Well, it's ironic because I was doing a home for a person who was a doctor who later became my dear friend and my co-author of our first book. And she discovered she was chemically sensitive. She was working at a clinic that was, they were using pesticides, and the fresh air return was sucking up aldehydes from the sterilization of the medical equipment. And she was getting sicker and sicker and didn't know why. And so by the time we were starting our house, she said, Paula, I know what's wrong with me, and guess what? That's what's wrong with you too. And so that was our first healthy house. And I thought it was going to be my only healthy house. We started to learn what we could at that time, and then people started calling us. They were coming out of the woodwork and saying, I have the same thing. I heard that you two know what to do. Can you help me? And so that was the start of this path. And then we thought, well, we know so much, we'll write a book. And then the prospect of writing a book, we realized we were just skimming the surface. And so lots of research came after that.
So what are some things that people can do, or what are some things that you found are essential to do to make sure the environment is better than it could be? What are some of the I don't know, like, so if someone suspects they have a chemical sensitivity, what
Yes.
do they start with? How do they start even figuring out if they do or not, or assuming that they do? How do they start the process of improving their environment?
So how do you make a healthy house is really the question. And I'll give some highlights. It's basically you do 1,000 things differently. Those 1,000 things have gotten easier and easier to do as the public and manufacturers become aware that healthy materials should be used in the construction of a home. What goes wrong with homes? Well, there's 3 basic things that we see over and over again. Either the house has too many chemicals in it, or the house gets moldy, or there's electromagnetic radiation, either generated by the household wiring or coming into the house from the surroundings. So if you already live in a house that isn't supporting health, there are several things you can do. If you're going to do renovation and your funds are limited, people's funds are limited for this kind of project, then we start with the bedroom and create what's called a bedroom sanctuary. So at least when that person is sleeping for their 8 hours, 7 hours in bed, they don't have sheets with chemicals, they don't have bed with chemicals, they don't have, they've turned off the electricity to their room, and the room has been checked for mold. Once people get sick, they have trouble finding places to live because they can't tolerate what many people think they're in a fine home, but to someone who's already ill and is hypersensitive, that home is a sick home. So start with the bedroom, start with standalone filters. If we're starting from scratch, we do eliminate the most probable causes of things that will turn into moldy houses later. Where do we find mold? Crawl spaces, basements, attics, leaks. So we build in measures that will prevent that from happening. Specify every product going into the buildings to make sure that they're benign and don't have chemicals of concern. And introduce protocols into the construction. And the result is that you'll walk in a home that has no odor. The electromagnetics have been tamed, and it's a home that over time won't get moldy.
But what if you're overwhelmed by the whole process and you're not feeling well already? How can you take the first baby steps towards helping yourself? And you're on a limited budget.
Yeah. Welcome to the world of most people who are in this situation. As I said, if you have a home that's at least workable, in other words, the home may have some chemicals, there aren't any overriding mold problems, and you're not living next door to a cell tower or something that you have no control over, then the first baby step is, where am I sleeping, as I mentioned. Secondly, you can get standalone filtration. So there's portable air filters that one can buy that do a really good job of filtering out chemicals, opening windows, just deeper cleaning with non-toxic cleaning products, getting a HEPA vacuum, making sure that there's not a lot of dust and chemicals in the dust that you're breathing all the time. All of those things are simpler things that you can do.
So what are like the hidden sources that seem to be the worst offenders for people? Is it, let's say let's start with the bedroom. Is it the sheets and the pillows and pillowcases, or is it just the air in the bedroom?
Well, the answer is going to be yes. What could be in a bedroom? Well, the walls could be moldy. On the exterior walls, there could be hidden mold that you wouldn't know about, couldn't smell, couldn't see. It could be that there's electromagnetic issues with the home wiring that can be corrected or at least shut off at night. And it could be that there are, most standard beds have a lot of chemicals in them, including fire retardants. So You start with what you have. You take the obvious electrical. You don't need a plugged-in alarm clock beside your head. If you can afford a better mattress, go there. If you can't, then get a mattress cover that's benign. Get sheets, cotton sheets that are organic. They're readily available now. Make sure the home is clean or the room is clean and uncluttered. So those are baby steps that one can take.
What about the architecture of a home itself? Is there a way to lay out the rooms? There's obviously you could open the window, et cetera, or open the doors. But is there a way to to design a home so that air flows better and isn't stagnant? And there's probably a lot of things that you wouldn't even consider. Like, what are some of the architectural things?
Sure. If we're starting from scratch, just for I'll say a normal healthy house for a healthy person, we want to examine: is there a basement or crawl space? Does there have to be one? If one has to have one, what steps do we make to create it healthier? What often happens is people move into a brand new home with a brand new basement, put sheetrock in the walls of the basement. Those basement walls are still drying for many, many years, and the sheetrock would get mold because that's paper faced. So I won't get into too many details, but there are many steps you can take to finish out a basement, for example, if you have to have one. If you can do without one or a crawl space, wonderful. Attached garage is another obvious source of pollution that is so common that people don't even think twice about it. So how can you have a detached garage with a breezeway leading to your house? That would be healthiest. If the garage has to be attached, can you exhaust the air out of the garage? Can you make it airtight, the connection to the house, etc.? So there are many, many levels we can work on. One is there's the ideal home, and then there's how do we work the cultural compromises. I've had people tell me we can't detach a garage because it'll lessen our real estate value. How do we work with that to make the best out of a not so good built-in cultural problem? Rooms can be designed so they each have cross ventilation. Now, for someone with special needs, we can introduce higher levels of filtration. I like to create a screened-in porch where people can sleep outdoors if anything happens to the home. They're not homeless. They have somewhere they can. We take care of definitely electromagnetics, etc. And some people, for example, can't even be around kitchen smells, the smell of food cooking, so then that needs to be an isolated room. Some people need an absolute decontamination of their visitors. Their house is fine, and then someone comes in who lives in a moldy house, and that could be very ill. So sometimes we create a decontamination for guests.
Yeah, it's funny. This is evoking a whole bunch of memories. Like, my dad smoked for a while, and when my first child was born, my wife said, you can't hold the baby unless you change your shirt, at least and wash your hands and all that stuff. And I'm thinking about if I've ever accompanied my wife to a nail salon, I can't even stand to go in there. I don't know, the people that work in those places are alive and not dead of all kinds of horrible diseases, breathing that stuff. And I just, now that as you're talking, I just feel like over time I've gotten more sensitive to stuff. Like my wife, got into an accident and we got a new car and I couldn't ride in it for the first 2 months because they must have treated all the interior stuff with some kind of horrible chemicals and it just gave me terrible allergies. And, I had someone wipe down the inside of the car and leave the windows open overnight for 3 nights in a row. And I mean, just to get rid of that crap. And it's terrible.
It is terrible. And new cars are very, very challenging. And there are things you can do. There's for example, a new car filter that you can get from the company is Faust, and they make a filter that has a canister in it for the kinds of chemicals that are found in new cars. And that has been the only way I've survived a new car is to drive around with that filter going for the first few months. And so you are typical then of someone who's beginning to realize they are sensitive. One of the telltale signs is smells bother you.
Yep. My wife has switched to a lot of natural cleaners, vinegar, things like that. And all of a sudden, I don't know, someone else in my house put bleach things in the toilets, and I was it made me sick. I was I cannot have that. It's, right away, it was just awful.
You bring up a great point. Products that a person uses in their house are crucial. So it's not enough to just create a healthy home. An unaware homeowner could ruin it in a day by plugging in those scented air things, or using scented laundry products. So it goes hand in hand. You need to be educated about how you use the house, and you're mentioning some really good examples, so I didn't want to let that pass.
Yeah, no, that's fine. It's just, part of the problem is when you live with someone, if they're not sensitive to you, they'll tell you, oh, you're fine. Oh, I don't smell anything. It's like, there's also a psychological component where people have to respect and understand that some people have these problems. To you, let's say it may not bother you at all, but to someone else, it may be like horrible.
Yes, absolutely. And there's a little bit more awareness now. Now you'll see occasionally this is a scent-free premise, or, it's just like smoking. People who smoke didn't realize that when you're sitting in a restaurant, you really don't want to be inhaling their fumes. But the idea of not allowing people to smoke in a restaurant was unheard of, what was it, 20 or 30 years ago, and now it's the norm. And I'm hoping we'll come to that same level of awareness just about scented products in general.
Yeah, like Febreze and Wick and all those things. When I travel now, I go to hotels and it seems like just every room has stuff in it, and I don't know. It's frustrating. I'm sure it makes it very difficult if it gets bad enough to go anywhere.
It is. Many people are pretty homebound. I travel. I consider myself well now, and I travel a lot for work, but I still call ahead to the hotel and make sure the sheets are unscented and that they're willing to clean the room with just vinegar and water. Because
you asked for that.
Okay. Yeah, you can ask for that, and most places don't think you're crazy anymore. 20 years ago, they thought it was nuts. They even had places hang up on me, but now there's so much more awareness that if you know to ask, you might be okay.
Is there, I don't know, is there an MCS or multiple chemical sensitivity designation that people can get if they have enough problems, so that when they travel or when they go to places that they can show a badge or something and request things to be modified, and that would give some credence to what they're saying?
I wish there were. There are more doctors are finally becoming aware of MCS, but for long, and I still don't know if it's a recognized condition by the AMA, and so no, that doesn't usually work. But people are aware of allergies, and I've even flying in Canada, I've heard announcements: don't open any bags with peanuts in them. There may be someone with peanut sensitivities, and now things are labeled. So I don't even bother to explain. I just say I am allergic to perfume, and it puts it in a context that they may begin to understand. But it is, once you do create a home that's a sanctuary, it's very hard to travel. It's appalling, really, to realize the toxics that are out there in day-to-day living in many environments, most environments.
I was going to joke with you that the AMA would never be able to say that MCS is a condition, because they would want to prescribe another chemical to fix it, which wouldn't work. So by very definition, it probably won't happen.
A lot of people are misdiagnosed, and then when the diagnosis doesn't work, they're referred to a psychiatrist. In fact,
that's true.
Many people with chemical sensitivity see many doctors before they finally find someone who can work with them. Same thing with mold toxicity and electromagnetics. They're complex conditions, and I am happy that it seems we're going and that we're headed in the right direction medically. We're just not there yet for people who are suffering.
So how do people work with you, or what is the name for a consultant that you could get, help you evaluate your home's air and EMF? Or they call it building biologists? What would you call that person?
Yes. I work as an architect more. I'm not a home inspector per se. I work at the other end of the spectrum. But the Building Biology Institute is a great organization, which it's my mother organization, I would say, and actually faculty there, and have been involved for many, many years, because when all of these things were wrong with me, they were the only ones that understood what was going on. And on their website, it's buildingbiologyinstitute.org. There's a Find an Expert page, and it's listed geographically. And there, someone could go and find people with the certification to come in and look at their home in a holistic way and test it and see what's wrong, what's going on, what's wrong with it, and then offer constructive suggestions about how to repair it.
Okay, and then last couple of questions. So on the architecture side, what do you find yourself doing, and what kind of clients are requesting it? I mean, do you get any commercial requests, or this is all residential?
I really mostly specialize in residential. I've worked on some commercial things, but I wear two hats. We do architectural design from the very beginning for people who want health, and then I can apply all of the wonderful, subtle principles of building biology that not only create a house that's toxic-free, it's nurturing in every respect. I love doing that work. But I also work as a consultant all over North America for people who have already sensitivities or other people who just know they want a healthy house. And then I work with their team, their architect, their builder, their officials, and we work together. And I help with educating the team and then prepare a manual for them. It's about a 70 or 80 page manual that at best becomes part of the construction contract, and it lists all of the protocols and materials that are safe, and then we're on hand to vet other materials if the builder wants to use them, or it's all that's available, or there's some belief that it's a fine product. We'll look at it and let the owners and the team know, yes, this is a healthy product, go ahead and use it, or we don't know enough about it from the information available, or here are some chemicals of concern that are red listed by 20 organizations. I wouldn't use this. This is worth sending away for something better.
Are there any that you're able to mention on the hit list, good or bad? Surprisingly so, surprisingly good, surprisingly bad.
Chemicals? Well,
yeah, or things you bring into your home, things that people would run into commonly.
Yeah, there's about 85,000 chemicals, and we only have complete information on about 7% of them. So there's a lot of information missing. But of those 7%, there's chemicals like good examples, formaldehyde. Now you will see products that say they're formaldehyde-free. When I got ill, it was primarily from formaldehyde, and it was in everything. Paints, glues, plywood products. It was just used throughout the house. And like you, I started off kind of a sensitive person, and it just threw me over the top. So if I can guarantee that if there's, for every product that has formaldehyde in it, there's another product made for the same purpose that doesn't anymore. So there's several red lists that are available by different organizations, and we pay attention to them all, and we call those the chemicals of concern. If someone wants a very quick, beautiful education in this, I would send them to the Green Science Institute, and there's 6 classes. Arlene Bloom came up with 6 classes of chemicals that we should avoid. And there's a little video on each of them. So in a short amount of time, someone can learn about the major challenges potentially in our environments, and to avoid those. So I think that's a great start for anyone.
Okay. Well, that's fantastic. Well, these are good resources, and I'm glad to have spoken to you. So, Paula, thank you for coming on the podcast.
You're welcome. Look for our 4th edition of Prescriptions for a Healthy House. It's going to be coming out sometime probably in the new year, and that'll be the most complete and up-to-date book that we've done.
Okay.
It should be very helpful to anyone who wants to.
Excellent.
You're listening to the Future Tech Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Future technologies such as artificial intelligence, stem cells, 3D printing, gene editing, Bitcoin, blockchain, the microbiome, quantum computing, virtual reality, and exploring space are much closer than you might think. In fact, many early versions of these technologies are in play right now, and the companies that are using these technologies are the focus of this podcast. My goal for you, the listener, is to learn from these podcasts. You may very well learn something that may change the course of your life for the better, steer you towards a new career, or give you insight into addressing a thorny medical problem. Remember, this podcast and its content is informational in nature only. No medical, tax, legal, financial, or psychological advice is being given. If you've enjoyed the podcast, please listen, subscribe, like, and tell your friends about it. Thank you.